Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're delving into a story you might think you know Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, but we're going to pull back the curtain a bit on how it actually reflects ancient customs that were, well, truly common across the globe. You know the biblical tale. Jacob falls for Rachel, agrees to work 7 years for her hand, only to be tricked into marrying her older sister, Leah. Then another 7 years for Rachel. It feels like this dramatic personal saga, doesn't it? But here's the question we're unpacking. Was Jacob's love story a unique, one-off biblical drama, or was it in fact a reflection of ancient customs common across the entire world? That's the mission for this deep dive. Our insights today are inspired by a really fascinating section of Sir James George Frazer's monumental work, Folklore in the Old Testament. We're focusing specifically on Part 2, Chapter 6, which he aptly titles Jacob's Marriage.
Yeah.
We'll show you how Frazer uses Jacob's seemingly personal narrative as a powerful lens to explore a whole mosaic of surprising, often counterintuitive marriage customs from various cultures. You'll discover patterns of human behavior rooted in economic, social, and practical realities that might just give you some serious aha moments and entirely new perspectives on traditions that at first glance seem pretty strange.
It really is remarkable how a single biblical narrative can open up such a vast anthropological landscape. And Frazer meticulously highlights this. He starts right at the beginning with Jacob's journey to Haran. The biblical account in Genesis seems straightforward enough. Jacob flees the wrath of his brother Esau after, supplanting him.
Right, a desperate run for his life. Seems simple.
But Frazer points out that there are actually two distinct accounts within Genesis, which some biblical scholars attribute to different ancient scribal traditions. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Different accounts.
Exactly. What scholars often call the Jehovistic writer frames Jacob's journey as a hurried escape, maybe intending just a short stay with kinsfolk until things cool down. But then the priestly writer, who's likely composing centuries later, offers a very different motive. Jacob is sent by his parents specifically to find a wife among his kinsfolk in Haran.
Why the change?
Well, the explicit reason given is to avoid marrying strange Hittite women of Canaan. Frazer hypothesizes that this later writer, perhaps viewing the old narratives from a perspective of, let's say, higher morality, aimed to put a more favorable color on Jacob's actions. So instead of just fleeing, it becomes this pious mission to find a suitable related wife. And this reframing connects directly to later historical concerns in Israel, particularly after the return from exile. There was significant pressure then to avoid marrying strange women outsiders. Frazer describes this powerful scene, a national assembly where repentant sinners publicly confessed their guilt for marrying foreign wives, resolving to put them away. Apparently it was the beginning of the rainy season, and the multitude sat drenched, chilled, and weeping. Less from the cold, perhaps, and more from the thought of divine wrath incurred by these imprudent marriages.
Wow. So that later anxiety about marrying outsiders probably shaped how they retold Jacob's story.
It seems very likely. The societal pressure to maintain purity of lineage clearly influenced how earlier stories, like Jacob's, were interpreted and presented.
It's incredible how that single narrative can unravel so many layers. So even Jacob's initial journey might have been reframed over time. But what's truly remarkable, regardless of why he went, is who he married. His two cousins, Leah and Rachel. And it turns out that practice marrying cousins is far from unique to Jacob's tale. It's a surprising global thread that Frazer pulls on.
Yes, and it's far more common and deliberate than many might imagine. Marrying cousins, especially what anthropologists call cross cousins, meaning the children of a brother and a sister, wasn't an anomaly. In many ancient societies, it was actually a preferred, even prescribed custom.
Prescribed, like required.
In some cases, yes.
Yeah.
In southern India, for instance, Frazer notes a widespread preference for a man to marry his mother's brother's daughter. He gives examples from numerous tribes and castes.
Okay, so why? What was the rationale behind preferring cross-cousin marriage?
Frazer shows it's often a very pragmatic strategy. Among groups like the Todas and Komatis in southern India, it's frequently about keeping property within the family or lineage. Think of it as an ancient form of wealth management. Among the Komatis, the custom holds such strong sway that Frazer relates a ballad about a husband who actually murdered his own wife just to ensure his daughter married his sister's son.
That's extreme.
It is. Violating this custom, they believed, was like bending the twig from its natural course and would inevitably bring misfortune. It shows how deeply ingrained these obligations could be.
It really underscores that commitment to tradition. It sounds like economic considerations were a huge driver. But Frazer also uncovers some truly surprising rituals connected to kinship itself.
Oh, definitely. Some of the ways kinship bonds were viewed and manipulated are quite vivid.
Can you share one of the maybe stranger examples?
Absolutely. Take the Thonga of South Africa. They had this belief that marriage between near relations would be infertile unless the bond of kinship was ritually severed.
Severed.
Through a very visceral ritual, they'd sacrifice a goat. The couple, sitting together on a mat, would be anointed with green liquid from the animal's stomach. Then, and this is intense, through a hole cut in the goat's skin, they had to reach in, tear out the raw liver with their teeth, no knives allowed, and swallow it.
Wow, that's graphic.
It is, but it highlights how kinship was viewed as this concrete, almost physical bond that needed to be physically manipulated for the marriage to work. And it wasn't just about breaking bonds. Reinforcing them through specific rules was also key. Among the Bataks of Sumatra, for example, marrying a father-sister's daughter is strictly forbidden. They have a saying, "How is it possible that water can flow up to its source?" It shows a kind of deeply ingrained cultural logic about lineage and flow.
Interesting. So rules going both ways, encouraging some cousin marriages, forbidding others.
Precisely. And in Borneo, among the Sea Dayaks, if first cousins did marry, they had to perform a special Burgaput ceremony to ward off bad consequences, like their rice crops getting blasted.
Yeah.
This involved sinking valuable ornaments in the river, sacrificing a pig, scattering its blood, all to appease whatever forces might be angered.
So lots of ritual to manage these close kin marriages.
Yes, and Frazer connects this entire thread of cross-cousin marriage back to what he calls the economic necessity of paying for a wife in kind, which often involved the direct exchange of sisters between families.
That's a powerful underlying theme connecting all these seemingly disparate customs, the economic reality of acquiring a wife. Makes sense. And speaking of acquiring wives, Jacob's story has another aspect implicitly present: marrying sisters and inheriting wives. This brings us to two complementary customs that Frazer explores: the sororate, where a man marries his wife's sister, and the levirate, where he marries a deceased brother's widow.
Indeed. And these customs were incredibly widespread, popping up all over the globe. Among many North American Indian tribes, like the Osages and Iroquois, the sororate marrying the wife's sister was often obligatory, especially if the first wife died young or childless. Sometimes it even included all the sisters if they were available.
All of them, like Jacob.
Potentially, yes. And the levirate, marrying the brother's widow, was also common. A key reason was often for a childless widow to ensure she raised seed to the dead man, basically maintaining the deceased brother's lineage and name. In Africa, among Bantu tribes like the Zulus and Haro, the widow was often seen as a valuable part of the deceased man's inheritance, a form of living property in a sense. The Zulus even have a specific custom where a younger brother is expected to beget children with the widow for the deceased elder brother.
So the children are considered the dead brother's heirs.
Exactly. And among the Wabemba of Central Africa, there's this duty for the surviving elder brother to take the death off the body of his predecessor's widow. This means cohabiting with her ritually. She actually isn't free to remarry anyone else until this ritual purification is performed.
Fascinating. And sometimes these customs combine in complex ways, right?
Very much so. Look at the Garo of Assam. A man typically first marries his mother's brother's daughter, that cross-cousin marriage again. But then later on, he might also marry his widowed mother-in-law. And because of the common practice of sister exchange between families in the previous generation, this mother-in-law often also happens to be his paternal aunt.
Wait, so he marries his cousin and then later his aunt mother-in-law.
Yes. Frazer points out that this particular custom seems driven largely by a rather mercenary motive, basically enjoying the old lady's property.
Okay, so it's not just about tradition or lineage, but sometimes about consolidating wealth or labor within the family or clan.
That's a huge part of it. It sounds like these customs often originated from forms of what anthropologists sometimes call group marriage. Maybe not full communism, but situations where a group of brothers might have shared rights to a group of sisters.
Ah, so that explains why kinship terms in many of these societies often equate a wife's sister to a wife and a husband's brother to a husband.
Precisely. The terminology reflects an older, broader understanding of marital rights and obligations. And this also sheds light on some fascinating rules of avoidance, like those seen among the Santals. An elder brother is expected to avoid his younger brother's wife, very strict avoidance. But he typically has free, even flirtatious interaction with his elder brother's wife.
That seems counterintuitive. Why the difference?
Frazer suggests this marks an early step in the disintegration of group marriage. As individual pairings became more distinct, sexual jealousy likely emerged. The avoidance rule protects the younger brother's exclusive rights, while the freer interaction with the elder brother's wife might be a relic of the older system where brothers shared rights, particularly the elder brother having some precedence. It's like watching social evolution captured in etiquette.
That makes so much sense. It's like seeing a transition point in social norms fossilized in custom. Okay, let's bring it back to Jacob specifically and his famous 14 years of service for Leah and Rachel. Was this just an epic romantic gesture driven purely by love, or was it actually a recognized, maybe even common way of acquiring a wife?
Oh, it was absolutely a recognized widespread custom. Frazer shows that serving for a wife was a very practical solution, especially in societies where tangible wealth like livestock or goods needed for a bride price was scarce.
So paying with labor instead of cash or cows.
Exactly. A labor-based bride price. We see this in various Indian tribes like the Gonds and Santals. Among the Santals, for instance, there's the figure of the home bridegroom. This is often a needy young man who works for his prospective father-in-law for a set number of years. After completing his service, he not only gets the bride, but might also receive oxen and land to help him start his own household.
So it's an established path to marriage for someone without assets.
Yes, and the Moy and Steyings of Indochina offer an even more striking example that really highlights the economic calculation. Typically, a son-in-law lives and works in his wife's house. But here's the crucial bit. If he ever wishes to take his bride away to his own home village, he must provide his father-in-law with a strong, healthy male slave.
A slave as direct compensation.
As direct compensation for the lost labor his service represented. It explicitly quantifies the economic value of his work. Even in parts of the Indian archipelago, like among the Beri-speaking Torajas, Frazer notes that sometimes children born during the period of service before the full bride price or service period was complete actually belonged to the mother's family, not the father's.
Reinforcing that idea of ongoing compensation.
Precisely. It's all tied to fulfilling that economic obligation.
That's a stark reminder of the value placed on labor and the hardships involved for the groom. Reading about it, it sounds a lot like Jacob's own lament in Genesis, right?
It really does. Jacob complains, "In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from mine eyes." And Frazer draws a direct parallel to the Chukchi of Siberia. A Chukchi wooer might have to tend the prospective father-in-law's reindeer herd in incredibly harsh Arctic conditions. He could be deprived of food, proper shelter, even subjected to abuse, all while trying to prove his worth and please the girl's father. The reward: a share of the reindeer herd, proportional to the length and quality of his service.
Wow, that puts Jacob's 14 years in a different light. Not just patience, but real hardship as part of the deal.
Absolutely. Frazer concludes that serving for a wife was simply, for many, the easiest and cheapest way of obtaining a wife when property for an outright purchase just wasn't available. It was a fundamental economic strategy.
It really seems like economics and social structure are intertwined in all these customs. Which brings us to another curious rule Frazer explores: the widespread idea that younger siblings cannot marry before their elders. We see Laban use this excuse with Jacob, right? It must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Was that just Laban being tricky, or was it a real rule?
It seems to have been a very real and widespread rule, or at least a strong social expectation. Breaking it often incurred social disapproval, sometimes even penalties. Ancient Indian lawgivers, Frazer notes, threatened damnation for breaches. And in European folklore, you find traces of this disapproval, like the elder unmarried sister having to wear green stockings or dance in a hog's trough at the younger sister's wedding, signs of social failure or shame.
Green stockings. Okay, so why this emphasis on seniority in marriage?
Frazer connects this to systems known as age grades. These are particularly well documented in some East African pastoralist tribes like the Maasai, Wadaveda, and Nandi. In these societies, the entire community, especially the men, is formally divided into distinct groups based on age. People progress through these grades together, often marked by initiation ceremonies like circumcision.
And circumcision was often a prerequisite for marriage itself, right?
Exactly. Marriage was tied to reaching a certain social status, defined by age and initiation. Among the Maasai, Frazer describes something quite radical. Sexual communism, or something very like it prevails between all the men of one age grade and the women of the corresponding age grade.
Yeah.
Within this system, adultery was apparently only considered an offense and punishable if the partners belonged to different age grades.
So seniority wasn't just about who marries first, but defined the pool of eligible partners.
In a way, yes. The Kayakaya of New Guinea also had specific age grades for males and females, and marriage was the event that formally shifted a man from, say, the initiated young man grade into the married man grade. It structured the life course.
So while these systems might seem restrictive to us, focusing on age and seniority, they actually provided a clear framework. Everyone knew where they stood and what the legitimate marital options were.
That seems to be the case. And it connects to the idea of the classificatory or group system of relationship. This wider net of kinship meant that even if a man didn't have a suitable blood cousin available that tradition preferred, he could usually find someone classified as a group cousin within the right category, perhaps someone from the correct age grade or lineage segment to legitimize a match. It ensured most people had a socially sanctioned path to marriage.
It broadens the options within the rules.
Exactly. And this ties back again to the levirate and sororate and those seniority rules we discussed earlier. Remember the Santo rule. An elder brother avoids the younger brother's wife, but not the elder brother's wife.
Yeah, the jealousy angle.
Right. That prohibition on marrying a younger brother's widow, while allowing or even encouraging marriage to an elder brother's widow, the levirate, might stem from that same process, the disintegration of group marriage. As individual family units became more defined, the younger brother's unique claim needed protection, perhaps more so than the elder's, whose status might have afforded him residual rights from the older system.
It's like a snapshot of changing social dynamics.
It really is. And Frazer emphasizes that, in general, primitive societies viewed remaining unmarried with astonishment and disfavor. It wasn't just a personal choice. It potentially undermined the community structure, especially when marriage was tied to vital rights like circumcision and entry into adulthood or specific age grades. So the true culprit in their eyes wasn't necessarily the younger sibling who jumped the queue to marry, but rather the elder sibling who neglected the promptings of nature and the claims of society by remaining single and holding things up.
That's a complete inversion of how we might see it. The pressure was on the elder to marry promptly.
Precisely. Social obligation trumped individual timing.
So what does this all mean? When we really look at Jacob's story through the meticulous research of Sir James George Frazer, especially in Folklore in the Old Testament, Part 2, Chapter 6, it becomes so clear that his narrative, far from being this isolated, unique tale, is actually reflecting a whole rich tapestry of ancient marriage customs and social structures found worldwide. The biblical account, as Frazer puts it, seems truly drawn from the life.
Exactly. The prevalence of cross-cousin marriage, the complementary roles of the sororate and levirate, and the widespread custom of serving for a wife. These weren't just random quirks. They were often driven by very real underlying economic necessities and complex kinship systems that dictated social order. These customs were practical, sometimes quite ingenious, solutions to fundamental human needs for family, progeny, inheritance, and social stability in worlds very different from our own.
Absolutely. And so, maybe a final thought for you listening. As you reflect on these ancient traditions, these ways of organizing society, and Jacob's epic journey, what do you think they reveal about the enduring human quest for belonging, for family, for continuity, and maybe, too, about the surprising, sometimes challenging ways societies have adapted over millennia to ensure their survival, even if those ways clash with our modern notions of love, choice, and family? It might even make you pause and think about how economic and social forces continue to shape our own relationships today, perhaps in ways we don't always recognize.